that are themed as haram and themed as things that may lead you astray from a more noble path.
Yeah.
Now, from
in case you need it from.
Okay.
Yeah.
from a logical standpoint, I can see where religions, just generally Islam, Christianity, and so on, so have their fundamental cores. And my thing is where we draw the line between those kind of like fundamental principles, and then we go to the more intricate principles where, for in particular, I was talking to someone the other week and we were talking about circumcision, and he was talking about the Persian Empire and circumcision and how that basically arose and the origin of that. Now he said that basically the origin of circumcision in the Persian Empire was when the Persians took over their lot of empire, right? They would have people converting into the religion because you knew there was a higher tax tariff for people who were non-Muslim than people who were Muslim. So it made sense financially for a lot of people to convert into Islam financially. Now for me, that doesn't necessarily say true faith. That says almost not necessarily a coercion, but an incentive kind of thing. And I don't necessarily think that's true faith in particular. So as a way of deterring people, this person basically promoted that for them to prove their allegiance to Islam, that they would have to get circumcised. And now we have a practice of circumcision that is rooted in many cultures, not just Islam, in African communities, in European communities, even in Judaic communities, that people have such sentimental value to these certain myths, which were geopolitical strategies back in the day, but are now so ingrained in our religion that we take it as gospel and key. So I want to have a talk to you today about certain superstitions and just opening the idea to deliberating within the Islamic community. Because I feel like there's a lot of brothers out there who want to talk about subjects, want to open the platform for debate and whatever. But because of that fear of superstition and that fear of being a non-believer, that they take a step back, and it's almost unspeakable to be labeled as a liberal Muslim, right? When you don't have to be a liberal Muslim, you can just be a Muslim, seeking Muslim, an educated Muslim. You know, it doesn't have to have a label on it, and it doesn't have to be you straying away from the teachings. It's supposedly you trying to find the truth behind the teachings, and so on and so. And confirming your belief, solidifying your knowledge, and solidifying your faith. Now, obviously, a lot of people will say, well, if you believe, then you should just believe. Faith should just be faith on its own. But I know in particular with certain religious leaders, or even prophets, they were given, I can't remember what the Arabic name is for it, but it's the proofs by Allah. They were given the proofs in order to convince people that he's not a fake and he's coming with a message from Allah. So I want to talk to you about superstitions and how you feel about there's certain taboo subjects within the Islamic community that are kept under key and chain by this culture of superstition.
I think when we talk about anything that has connotations attached to it, we need to understand where the connotations are actually coming from. So when we use the word superstition in the English language, usually we're referring to some kind of magical, otherwise extra rational recourse or discourse. So sometimes when we talk about witchcraft, for example, superstition is one of those words that we use to describe it. Obviously now, the post-enlightened West, when it looks back at, for example, the reign of James I or James VI of Scotland, I mean, he's the same person, from 1606 onwards. I mean, his campaign against witchcraft and these things are always looked, I would say in a way anachronistically. So you look at kind of the way we look at things now, post-enlightenment, scientific discourse, and superimpose that on, for instance, the Tudor and post-Tudor period of time. So, like, it depends on what we mean by superstition. So that's one thing. The second thing you said, which was very interesting, which I think is worth talking about, really, is talk about liberal Islam or liberal Muslims, and or some call themselves feminist. You're talking about feminist Muslims and these kinds of labels, right? And what I would say is that the extent to which one could identify or agree with those political philosophies / ideologies is the extent to which they would agree with Islam.
Of course.
If those individuals who claim to be Muslims believe in the premise that actually Islam is not just a man-made religion, it's actually something from God, it's something from the all-knowing, it's from the all-wise, it's from the all-powerful.
Of course.
So if that's the premise they're running by, you have to think about all of the injunctions, the prescriptions, the do's and the don'ts from the Quran and the Sunnah as branches from the proverbial tree. The core of the tree, the root of the tree, are the principles, the overriding universal principles which underpin the religion of Islam, which include things like, obviously at the core of it, Tawheed, the idea of one God, believing in one God, submission to one God, and these things there. So, and obviously the evidences of the Prophet Muhammad and the Quran and the Sunnah and these things. So one is convinced epistemologically with the fact that Islam is truth, with a capital T, and that it comes from God. Then that constitutes the root of the tree. The branches of the tree then become the injunctions which become almost automatically subscribed to. Because we think, okay, well, human beings have X amount of ways of structuring societies, aforetime, presently, and continually. So if that's the case, who knows best on how to structure society, how individuals should live in a familial context, how a family should live in a societal context, and so on and so forth, how governments should run. So the Islamic answer would be, God knows best. Allahu A'lam, we would say, God knows best. So if that's the case, then it makes sense for us to use Quran as the ultimate barometer, by which and through which we assess all of those other political philosophies, including liberalism and feminism, etc. And wherein which they differ with the Quranic discourse or the Islamic discourse, we would reject them. Now, why I find it sometimes contradictory for someone to identify themselves as a liberal Muslim, and here when I talk about liberalism, I'm talking about a political philosophy, or a feminist Muslim, and here, once again, I'm talking about the political philosophy, is because the scholastic traditions that are associated with those respective political philosophies, for example, are not always in contradistinction with the Quranic and Islamic narrative. I feel like at one point there has to be compromise. That the Quran says, وَدُّوا لَوْ تُدْهِنُوا فَيُدْهِنُونَ. They wish that you can compromise so that they can compromise with you.
Of course.
So the Quran says that.
This is it,
exactly, right. So you compromise with them, and you will compromise with you compromise with them. So there is a mutual compromise, which Islam at the base level doesn't allow. In fact, it criticizes.
It does,
So I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to kind of choose the direction you want to live your life in. You can't be pulled apart. I'm really shaking my hand.
I like it.
You know what I mean?
Go.
You can't be pulled apart. And in psychology, the people that actually live like that are associated with something called cognitive dissonance. So for me, and that's why I made recently, I got a Twitter account. I'm just kind of putting quotes there, you know. I put a Twitter post recently, a tweet. It's a cool tweet, yeah? I'm new to the thing, right?
I don't know, so I wouldn't even know.
I'm very new to it myself. So I was saying that I put a tweet that so-called feminist Muslims are either uninformed or unsatisfied with either Islam or feminism respectively, right? That's the situation, because for instance, when we talk about inheritance, if we look at the scholastic tradition, the inheritance laws in the Quran would not be in contradistinction with the feminist narrative. The so-called patriarchal narrative of the feminists would not be in contradistinction with the family unit and the fact that the father is, has these rights and the mother has these rights in Islam and the husband has these rights in Islam. So you have to make a compromise, or you have to falsify your belief, you have to fake your belief, you have to pretend that you believe in something when you don't actually believe in something, or you have to superimpose a narrative on one of those things. So you either superimpose an Islamic narrative on the feminist discourse, or vice versa.
See, I feel like you're in danger of doing exactly what you accuse other people of doing, and this is where I think we need to draw a conclusion, just so that, like you said, there can be a compromise on both sides, so that we can build a bridge together and work together. So obviously, I'll start off with the first thing, because you said a few things which is really good. Like with the superstition thing, yes, there is a leniency to excusing it to mumbo jumbo, superstition and supernatural, whatever. But if we look at it historically and factually, superstitions were actually certain things that were made to be supernatural and uncontrollable by human beings in order to deter any behavior within that ethic, within that environment. I'll give you the mummy's tombs curse, for example, right? Why do we have the mummy's tombs curse? We have the mummy's tombs curse because people were trying to excavate the pyramids at the time, but you had a lot of pyramid robbers basically taking the gold and all the riches of the pharaohs back when. Now historically that's not good, because that's evidence that they're taking historically from us. So they made up this myth, right, of the superstitious mummy's curse to keep people away from that, and it worked very well. And it's the same with aliens, right? We have a civilization of supposedly white supremacy who love to speak about aliens, especially when it comes to foreign works of architecture. Like they'll often say the aliens built the pyramids. The aliens didn't build the pyramids. They're just scared to admit that black people built the pyramids or Africans built the pyramids because it takes away their valid reason of supposedly enslaving subhuman human beings. So when we're talking about superstition, yes, there's that side of paranormal activity if you've ever seen the film, but then there's also the real side of political.
How would you define superstition yourself?
For me, I use superstition as the word, in particular in this case, in the sense that a subject is not necessarily something that you should delve into, right? Because it may lead you astray, or you may do
say that again. So
superstition for me, like you said, there's the paranormal extra movie, the dramatized Hollywood version that you.
But what is, like, when you say paranormal?
Yeah.
So once again, because the thing is
uncontrollable by human behavior or human power.
So most things which, in that definition of superstition, which are unexplainable by human beings, would be, in your definition, superstitious.
Yeah.
For example, quantum mechanics. Is that superstitious?
It would have been superstitious back in the day, and you probably would have been executed for talking about it.
No, but today.
Yeah,
because we can't explain it.
But this is the thing, we have more science and we have more books to actually educate. Back in the day, people could not read. Reading was only reserved for the liberal elite or the elite in general.
No, but the point, sorry, just, I'm not trying to cut you off, I apologize.
I just wanted to say, in particular, we had people that could not read. So getting this information was not easy for them, and they saw it as works of the extraordinary. And this is why you had the Salem witch trials and
that's why definitions are very important.
They are very important.
So if we define superstition as that which we can't explain.
Yeah.
Now, if we do a double split experiment, with a wave and a particle, and you know what I'm saying, we shoot an electron, you know, and we put a slit in the middle like that, and we see how does it react in certain conditions, we'll find that all of the laws of formal logic are completely suspended in that situation. Right. Literally what's happening is magic.
Yeah.
So on a quantum level, we don't know why that is happening.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, we don't know yet, but the point is we don't know. We don't know.
This is the thing.
So,
you need to realize.
So is that superstitious?
But no, because here's the thing. We have the tools to measure, observe, and assess that, and gather the knowledge after the event has happened. That's how things happen.
So what is
things
superstitious?
Happen, we assess it, we observe, we measure, and then we study it after, and that's where the information comes. Information never really.
So it follows the scientific method, but I'm still asking. So how would you define superstition?
So what I'm trying to say is there's a difference between superstition of the Hollywood kind, where everything is superly unexplainable, and there's a superstition that we can explain, which is supposed to be a deterrent for certain people.
No, but that we can't explain.
But we
do you know? Let me ask you a question then. Do you know, this is a serious question.
Yeah, go on.
Do you know the double split experiment? Yeah. I'm not sure if are you aware of this experiment? I'm not a quantum physicist.
No.
All right, but this is my understanding of the experiment. Okay, you put two slits, yeah, and then you shoot an electron or an atom or something, yeah. You shoot it with like a gun that shoots the thing. Now, if you shoot it in the first instance, it will act like basically it won't act like a particle, it will act like a wave. Okay. Yeah, it will act like a wave.
When you say a wave, how do you observe that it acts like a wave?
So a wave, if you look at this, is a very difficult thing to explain without anything, without illustrations. But a wave, for example, look at light. Light and sound are two interesting examples of waves. The way waves work is that, for example, if I shine a torch on a black wall, the way it's going to illuminate on the wall is going to be like it's going to cover the wall with light. Yeah. So it's going to be like a wave effect.
There's a lot of factors there.
Right. If you put a split in the middle, if you put like a little, let's say a hole in the middle of it, you got a hole now. You got a hole, and you got a torch. You're still going to have light on the other side. Yeah. Whereas if you have like, let's say pellets, and you shoot it through, it's going to go only in one direction. You're only going to see one bit, which has got. So a particle acts differently to a wave. The point is, when you do a double split experiment, you realize that the particle, which we think is a particle, the electron, or in this case the atom, whatever it may be, when you shoot it through the double split, it acts like we think it acts like a particle, but it acts like a wave. So this is where it becomes even more wacky. It's become superstitious. Let me tell you something. You know, this is serious stuff. Go into this is not me just saying this. Now, if you put observational devices, like for example cameras, detectors, so that we see exactly what's happening when it goes through the split. The electron acts differently, as if it knows what's going on.
Of course.
Now we know that atoms and electrons are not animate things.
All right.
We know that they're inanimate, right? They don't have a brain, they don't have a nucleus, they don't have a mind, they don't have knowledge. No, we know that. I mean, from science, they're not in the realm of biology.
I think generally when you say they have no minds, they have no thing or whatever, you need to remember atoms and electrons, they move.
They don't have any, maybe you're right.
In comparison to stuff like stones and whatever.
Fine, let's not say minds.
They have natural order. They have natural.
No, I accept it, but they don't have a nucleus. They don't have a brain. They're not biology.
They don't necessarily have a processing system the same way we do.
Perfect. So it's not biology. It's physics. Yeah. So here, why does it act like biology? Why does it act like it knows what it's doing when you're observing it? These are questions which have baffled quantum physicists. Literally, if I forget about being a physicist, if I were to come in the garb of a magician, and I did the double split experiment, not as a scientist, but as a magician, everyone would describe what I'm doing as magic. Say, look, there's this kind of optical illusion, there's some kind of trickery going on. Now, the point I'm making is this, is that in the New Age scientific post-enlightenment, post-colonial discourse, now it is a post-colonial discourse.
We have to be very careful, but what I'm trying to say, I actually agree with you.
Yeah.
The thing is, I feel like you're in danger of conflating all colonial science with just science in general. Just because science over here has advanced, it doesn't mean that they're all trying to enforce that knowledge.
And that's not my point. What I'm saying is that when someone packages something in scientific jargon and terminology, it becomes more digestible for the masses, even if it's unexplainable on every level. Like this particular example.
Now, what I said earlier,
so the point I'm making to you is superstition has become a loaded term with deep connotations, which, in my opinion, new atheists like to use to try and target basically theists. So we don't want to fall into narrative. Now, that's the point I'm making to you. That just because something is scientific, it doesn't mean it's devoid. It's completely, in a sense, non-falsifiable.
Of course.
You know, and that's the whole nature of science in the first place.
But even then, even if we're talking about atheists and theists, right? You need to understand that the main thing that atheists don't understand is that the whole point of religion is that it's based on faith anyway. That's the core.
And so
it's
science.
Based on faith, exactly.
In many ways, science is the same.
That's what I'm saying. Atheists completely forget that point, meaning that whether or not there's proof or falsifiable evidence, the whole point is that you believe. That's the faith. That's the point of religion, and I think that's what a lot of atheists miss. But again, this is what I'm trying to say. I feel like we're trying to build bridges here.
Of course.
But the problem is you're conflating two different groups of people into one mass, which is basically kind of like almost attacking Islam. But the problem is, what we need to do is we need to build a bridge of understanding and a bridge of knowledge as well, from what we understand to what you understand and so on. Because if we keep doing this thing where it's a thing of New Age science is just trying to attack Islam.
No,
we're never
they used to attack black people just 20 or 30 years. Look at eugenics. Look, for example, look at the program in because the thing is, we have to have one consistent way of dealing with scientific discourse. Look at, for example, how the Nazis were using science, right? Are you asking for?
I just wanted quickly. When we're talking about science, we're talking about two very different people in science. When we talk about eugenics, anyone who knows science from its key stage 3 science, right, knows that eugenics is such a futile way of looking at life because it brings down basically the survival of humanity into one specific factor. It's completely futile. It doesn't take into account natural nurture versus nature. It doesn't take into account environmental factors. It doesn't take into account a person's upbringing. It doesn't take into account many factors.
No, I'm not pro eugenics.
No, I understand that. But when we're talking about science, you need to remember there are different communities of the scientific community. That do understand there are people that can believe, but also want to be able to explore the beliefs of certain people, the context of certain people. Now, you said in particular that when we look back historically at the rules of King Henry VIII and so on, blah, 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 and
James I.
And we supposedly have the science of now. We cannot look in judgment retrospectively, and I completely agree with that. But the only problem is, what we're trying to say is no one's looking back in judgment retrospectively. People are looking back historically at certain things that are myths, certain things that are geopolitical.
How do you define a myth?
How do I define a myth? Something that is common knowledge but not really proven.
Okay, so something which is unproven is false.
Yeah.
That's not correct. That's called the argument of ignorance. For example, we didn't know that Neptune existed for maybe 1,300 years. Neptune, the planet.
Okay.
All right. So Isaac Newton, he, using his own physics, he kind of inferred the existence of Neptune.
Yeah.
Okay, and then that was confirmed through observations thereafter. But just because we don't know that Neptune exists, or we can't see Neptune, it doesn't mean that Neptune is not there.
But this is exactly my
Just because something is unprovable, unproven, it doesn't mean it's not true.
But this is my point. I completely agree with that stance.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say in particular, where we have proof historically, right, that certain geopolitical actions were used as a way of keeping control of your diaspora or your population or your demographic in general, right? We then look to certain teachings and realize that it's become more cultural and more religious and more sentimental along the way. I'll give you a fair example nowadays. We talk about modesty, right? We talk about modesty in Islam. We have so many sisters around here, I'm not going to point at everyone, but we have so many sisters around here who are dressed very modestly. And we can see that that's not only affected them in a positive light, in the sense that we have more Islamic sisters who are educated now than we have Islamic boys. But at the same time, I would then point to yourself, who's wearing a vest on, right, and showing your very aesthetic arms, and I show. No, that's a good thing. You should be comfortable in your sexuality.
It's not nothing to do with sexuality, my friend. But I've got a vitamin D deficiency. You know, I take them. I like the sun, but this is also Islamically acceptable.
This is what I'm trying to say. Like when we talk about that, there may be women with vitamin D deficiency as well.
Yeah, they do. A lot of them do have that.
Is it then, from what we know, appropriate for them to be wearing something that completely covers?
Do you agree with the premise that things which are identical should be treated equally?
When you say things that should be identical, you have to point that out.
So, for example, let's look at it mathematically, right? 2 is equivalent to 4 is equivalent to 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Okay, yeah.
Accepted?
Yeah.
So mathematically they have the same value, yeah? Okay, so they should be treated equally.